to the ABC Podcast.
Always be cool.
The show where your hosts, DC and BK, showcase your local business and real estate pros going gangbusters in leadership, community involvement, and just being cool.
Here are your hosts, serial entrepreneurs, mortgage experts at Summit Lending, and partners in crime, Darren Copeland and Bobby Kerr.
All right, everybody, it's the Always Be Cool podcast at the Summit Lending Studios, hanging out with your hosts, Bobby Kerr, Darren Copeland.
What's up, everybody?
Man, we have had a phenomenal week of guests this week. Today, someone really special, Royals Hall of Famer, pitcher, closer, Jeff Montgomery.
All right, here we go. So born January 7th, 1962, played college ball at Marshall and was drafted by the Reds in 1983. 13 years in the majors, mostly with the Kansas City Royals. He's a three-time All-Star, AL saves leader in 1993 with 45, AL Rolaids relief winner as well in 1993. In 1998, he was the Royals pitcher of the year. He is the all-time saves leader for Kansas City with 304. He is also a member of the Kansas City Royals Hall of Fame. And Bobby, I don't know if you know this, but Jeff was part of one of the most lopsided trades in Royals history, coming here from the Cincinnati Reds for outfielder Van Snyder back in 1988. He is currently the co-host for Royals Live pregame and postgame shows on Bally Sports. All-around awesome guy, Jeff Montgomery. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'm so happy to be here.
Right?
I love talking baseball. I love talking about, especially this time of year.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Gives us all a little bit of hope for the spring, for sure.
It gets us fired up, for
Yeah,
sure.
man.
For
Well,
sure.
gosh, DC, you brought up some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Best part about this is that, like, I do my research, he does his research, and then we don't get together beforehand. We just come to the table and say, all right, let's just dive right in. So some of those things that he says, I'm like, man, that is such a great reminder of what an illustrious career you had.
Oh, man. Crazy.
It was interesting. I always felt like any successful athlete, particularly, it's all about consistency. Mm-hmm. And if you're a consistent performer, you're not going to maybe pop anybody's eyeballs out because you're not going to have these gaudy numbers. But I always like to say at the beginning of the year, my manager could have a pretty good idea of what he's going to get, over the course of the 6-month baseball season.
Right.
You mentioned a 93 season, led the league in saves in the Rolaids relief thing. That was really cool. I felt like my best season was 1989, I believe it was.
Yeah, that was kind of your coming out party, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting how all that happened. I mean, I was a guy who, as you mentioned, drafted by the Reds, made it to the big leagues after 5 years in the minor leagues with the Cincinnati Reds. Get traded to the Royals. I mean, just before spring training of '88, I get traded.
Yeah.
And growing up in Ohio, being a Reds fan, people would think, gosh, that had to be a heartbreaking situation getting traded, from your hometown team. It'd be like somebody who grew up near Kansas City getting traded from the Royals, right?
Right.
But I was actually happy. I mean, I think I was probably the happiest guy in baseball because I felt like I'm coming to an organization where I got a pretty good chance to stick.
To be the guy.
And I wasn't for sure if that was going to happen with the Reds. So anyway, I started the season in Omaha in '88.
Okay.
Get called up like in June or July. I remember it was during the College World Series because we're on this long road trip because the Rosenblatt Stadium, our home stadium, is where they played College World Series.
They needed the stadium, right?
So they'd send us on a 2-week road trip. Anyway, during that trip, I get called up and had a pretty decent showing over the next 3 or 4 months, whatever it was that I was in Kansas City. I go home. I remember John Wathan was my manager. I go home that winter, and he said, "Hey, go home. Get ready for the season. We want you on our ball club next year." So I work my tail off, get ready for the season, go into spring training camp, ready to go. And we had acquired Bob Boone as a catcher. Right?
That's right.
He came in to be our catcher in '89. And I'll never forget this. We're playing against the Red Sox over in Winter Haven, right toward the end of spring training camp. And Boone's catching. I'm going to pitch the 7th inning. So I go in, pitch the 7th inning. And before I go in, Boone's like, "What do you want to work on today?" I'm like, "I don't know. What do you think?" And he goes, "Well, look, here's the deal." He goes, Your control's pretty decent, not great. He goes, your stuff's pretty decent, not great. He goes, I'm going to set up in the middle of the plate. I'm going to give you a low strike zone. And I want you to try to hit my target every time. But it's going to be a low target, middle of the dish. So I go out there, 10 pitches, 3 outs. Right?
Really?
I come in, John the Duke Watson says, I like what I saw. You got the 8th. I got the 8th inning, 10 pitches, 3 outs.
Dang.
So I'm like on a roll. He goes, you got another one in you? And I go, sure. I go out for the 9th. I face 4 batters, get 3 outs. So all in all, I had 10 batters. I got 9 outs. I probably threw like 45 pitches max, right?
Right.
Wow.
That day, I became a big leaguer.
That's amazing.
That was the day that things really took off for me, and I kind of established in my mind that I could pitch in the big leagues consistently. And Bob Boone, very responsible for that. But I mentioned the '89 season. That's when it all started. It was that day against the Red Sox in Winter Haven, Florida.
That's fantastic, because during that season, weren't you setting up Steve Farr for a while?
I was, yes. I started the season. Tom Gordon and I were the setup guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
We pitched, 7th inning, 8th inning, whatever. Steve Farr was our closer, and then Steve, the Beast Farr, ends up hurting his knee, and he has to miss the second half of the year. So right around the All-Star break, I become the closer. Tom Flash Gordon goes into the rotation, and we both kind of took off from there.
So you said that day is kind of when you quote unquote became a big leaguer, right? So maybe speak to like the mental part of this. Wasn't like you just got some great physical gift that day, right? It was more of a mental thing. So maybe I think speak to some of the folks about how that plays into all big leaguers and how important the mental strength is.
Well, I've always felt like there are essentially different phases or steps that you take along the way to becoming like a bona fide, surefire player at that level. First, you've got to get to the big leagues. And once you get to the big leagues, you got to prove to yourself you can stay in the big leagues. And you'll go through these ups and downs, and the ups are easy. I mean, it's like anything. When things are going well, it's so easy to go out there and do your job. When you're not, going so well, that's when it's tough, especially if you're not established, because you're thinking, okay, they're going to peck on my shoulder someday and say, hey, the manager needs you to see in his office, and he's sending you back to the minor leagues, right?
Right.
So that's one phase, is getting over that to where you feel like you have the ability, you have confidence that you're going to go out there on a consistent basis and perform. And then you get to the stage where, hey, from a career standpoint, I have to, from a financial standpoint, I have to solidify myself. I've got a short window to maximize my earnings and see what I can do. So that happens after 2 or 3 years. You get to arbitration eligibility, and eventually sometimes you hope to get to free agency. So you establish financial certainty in your life and for your family moving forward. So that's another stage that you kind of go. And then the stage is where all of that's over with and all you worry about is winning. And I saw that happen with our guys in 2014-15, the guys that won the World Series. Right. They all kind of come to the big leagues together. Eventually, they kind of establish themselves. Then eventually, they all made a bunch of money. And now all they got to do is about winning. They all were kind of going through those various stages or phases that I talked about at the same time. So it just kind of lightning in the bottle.
Right. Exactly. Well, let's kind of go chronological order here. So you came up with the Reds, and if I'm not mistaken, you played was Pete Rose your manager at that time?
Yes. Yep.
So
before you go, can we
go ahead.
Talk about some of these teammates that you had on that 1987 team? We've got Buddy Bell, Sal Butera, Terry Francona, Barry Larkin, Eric Davis, Paul O'Neill, Dave Parker, Tony Perez.
Yeah.
And by the way, Pete Rose is manager.
Yeah. How was that?
Well, the interesting thing is we finished in second place. Okay. We finished in second place. The next year, or maybe a year or so afterwards, they hire Lou Piniella, and he wins the World Series with essentially that same group of players.
Right.
And I love Pete Rose. I mean, my favorite player of all time. There will never be another Pete Rose in me. However, as a manager, I felt like there were certain shortcomings. You mentioned Buddy Bell and Terry Francona, 2 players who eventually became major league managers. And Terry Francona, one of the best managers in baseball, be a Hall of Fame manager. But those guys were more suited to manage than Pete. Now, Buddy Bell had an outstanding career. Terry Francona had a nice major league career, but he was never a star. But he learned the game. He learned because he was always on the bench. He's always going through situations. And as a utility player, you have to be prepared for a whole lot of different things. And I think that's what made Terry Francona a really good manager. A lot of times you'll see catchers, and oftentimes backup catchers, become good managers because they're setting up bullpen the majority of the game. Going through the situations and understanding, what are we going to hit and run here? Are we going to bunt? Are we going to steal base? All those things, it just kind of in their mind becomes almost automatic and second nature to them. Bob Melvin was a backup catcher in a couple years here in Kansas City. And I remember seeing him in our bullpen, and he'd be asking questions. He said, we'll go to pinch hitter. I mean, he would be going through these things, and it just kind of groomed him to become a manager. But again, I love Pete Rose, but from a managerial standpoint, he just was not cut out to be a manager.
So, favorite player of all time, and then he's your manager. What was that like as a player to have him? Was it like star-studded?
Was that kind of an out-of-body experience? Like, I'm really playing for Pete Rose.
Well, he was just like the guy next door. I mean, he was like any other guy in the clubhouse. He made you feel good, made you feel welcome. But as a young player, you could be intimidated by a guy who was a all-time hits leader, and he was very. He had a lot more confidence, obviously, in the more experienced and more veteran player. So as a rookie player, a young player, you certainly felt some pressure and some intimidation.
Exactly. No, I can see that because you went from the Reds, you get traded to the Royals. That's really cool to hear that you weren't like fully, depressed that you came over to the Royals, which is fantastic because I don't think I wrote this in my notes, but I think people forget, like in the late 80s and early 90s, the Royals had some pretty darn good clubs. Right. And also in the early 90s, Ewan Kaufman was shelling out some big bucks for some big time free agents as well. So talk a little bit about that, about coming over to this organization.
Well, the unfortunate part of the reality of what was going on was there were only two divisions in each league. There was American League East and American League West.
Before the wild card.
And there was no wild card. The wild card was going to happen in 1994, the year of the strike, in which we would have certainly been a playoff team that year because of the wild card. Unfortunately, the strike put an ending to that. But you had to win 100 games in your league in order to win, or in your division in order to win a chance to go to the postseason. And with only 4 teams making it, it was pretty tough. But the Royals we always would win upper 80s or low 90s in games. Think about today, you win 92 baseball games. I mean, you're going to be a high seed in the postseason, right? But that was just the way it was. And talking about the 94 situation, that was so disappointing when everything kind of just came to a screeching halt because we were so good. We were on such a roll. I remember at one point we won 14 consecutive baseball games. Yeah. We were on our way, and unfortunately, Mr. Kaufman passed away in '93. And once the strike hit, and there was really no bona fide leader or owner of the team, there was
just kind of wind out of the sails almost.
It was like an udderless ship. Really, no wind and no udder. I mean, no rudder there, and
it's an interesting way to put it.
It was just treading water essentially, and Mr. Glass, who was chairman of the board of directors running the club, he wanted to buy the club, but he still didn't own the club. And Mr. Kaufman left a finite amount of money behind to subsidize the team should it have losses, but that money wasn't going to last long, especially at about that time, 94, 95 after the strike. A lot of the large market teams just said, hey, we kind of wanted the owners, honestly, they wanted us to go on strike because they were going to break our union. They were going to break our player association.
Okay.
It didn't happen. Okay. But after that didn't happen, the large market owners said to the small market, like, guys, we were supposed to have this salary cap and it didn't happen. We're moving forward. And they just started giving out enormous contracts. I remember Albert Bell got a huge contract. Right after that all happened, it just kind of snowballed and it just kept going.
So in '94, did they ever come close to breaking the union at all during that strike?
I've said this many times. There was not one player that wanted to be the first player to cross that line, but there were literally dozens lined up to be tied for second. We were so close. It was so close because we've got a lot of players. I mean, think about this. If you're on a 40-man roster and you've never played in the major leagues, you're still on strike, okay? And guys had not, made hardly any money at all. Some guys had made no major league money. They were, minor league guys on a 40-man roster, and they were in situations where they couldn't afford to not have income. And the lion's share of our player association was not financially secure.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that meant there were a lot of players who were just, really, really on thin ice with regards to, making house payments and finding ways to pay their bills.
Right.
And it was just circumstantial how we end up going back to work. I mean, now Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She was a district court judge in New York, and in the Player Association, we filed a grievance saying the owners have not negotiated in good faith. She essentially ruled in our favor and said, hey, you have not, the first offer we got was the only offer we got, and that was before the strike, right, in August. Yeah. So she ends up saying, you're going back to work under the old working conditions, and we did. But had that not happened, I don't know how much longer we could have gone.
Wow. That's a pretty good insight.
Man.
Right?
Thanks for that perspective, because I think it's important that people hear, because a lot of people still talk about the strike. They're like, I'm not into baseball anymore because of the strike. And it's not like every single person involved, every single player involved was just, money's falling out of their pockets. And it wasn't, I mean, that was the perception. Well, screw baseball. All these rich guys, they just want to get richer and they're holding out. That's obviously not. It's not black and white.
So, Jeff, looking like, here we are 30-some years later, whatever it is, do you think that would have changed the small market teams with the salary cap? Do you think that would have helped, cities like Kansas City if it was a fair playing field across? Because obviously we don't want anyone to, lose salaries and, miss mortgage payments back in the 90s. But, I mean, do you think that long-term would have been better for the smaller market teams?
There's no doubt it would have been better for small market clubs. It would. The way I look at it is, players, whether it be back in the mid-90s or players now in the, 2022, 2023. I mean, you look at the salaries there are. The majority of the money goes to a small amount of players.
Right.
And it's a large market teams that can afford to give those large contracts. You win with experience. You don't always win with payroll, but you win with experience. And generally, experience means payroll.
Right. Exactly.
And some of those contracts that went out today and yesterday.
Oh, they're crazy, but
$300+ million.
But back in the day when Ewing Kauffman was around, I mean, he was no stranger. I mean, he was kind of in the mix of handing out some of those big contracts.
I think in 1989 or 1990, we had the largest payroll in Major League Baseball.
Right.
Wow. I don't think I didn't know that.
And it was nowhere near even close to what they are today. But Mr. Kauffman was in a position where he could write a check. Now, if back then we're putting over 2 million people in the stands every year too.
Sure.
And the salaries were nothing comparatively what they are. Now, he may have lost money, but he could afford to write, I'm going to use a number, a $5 million check to subsidize the losses for the team. Even though he might have the highest payroll in baseball, he could afford to write that $5 million check. And he was glad to write it because he wanted a competitive team on the field.
Right.
I mentioned earlier, after the strike, the large market teams just started spending money like crazy. At that point, the small market teams could no longer kind of keep up with the Joneses. And if Mr. Kauffman was going to write a check to keep up with whatever he had to spend, it might have been a $50 million check. And he wasn't going to do that.
Sure. But he really loved baseball, though, didn't he?
He loved baseball. Mrs. Kauffman, I mean, she was a huge fan as well. We were fortunate to have owners like the Kauffmans who were willing to do what they did for Kansas City.
Absolutely.
So we had Alex Gordon on the show yesterday. We've had George, and those two in particular told some stories. Because when I think about long-term Royals, right, the guys that have been with the team for a decade, that's a long time to stay with one organization, let alone their entire careers, which just about was you. They told some stories of how they almost ended up with other teams throughout the course of their career. Was there any time like that? You don't have to give specifics if you don't want to, but was there any opportunity or any time that was a conversation where you felt like you were going to end up somewhere else?
Really only one time. Darren mentioned earlier in 98, I was the Royals pitcher of the year. The season ends after the 98 season. The Royals don't offer me a contract. So I'm essentially going to be sitting at home retired, or I'm going to look for a job. And I wanted to pitch. I was still very
You still had a good year.
On top of my game. I can't remember how many saves I had, but I was, I'd thrown the ball well. So going into the 99 season, I was going to sign with Baltimore. So I was going to sign with.
Okay.
Baltimore, the Texas Rangers, and the Chicago Cubs had all offered me multi-year contracts.
Wow.
And the Orioles had offered me a 3-year contract. And I'll never forget, I'm sitting on my sofa. This is during December timeframe when free agency is really kind of hot and heavy. I get a phone call and I answer the phone. It's Cal Ripken.
No kidding.
And Cal's like, hey, man, he goes, hey, I heard you might have an interest in coming to Baltimore. He goes, you'd love it here. It's a
Doing
great
some
place
recruiting.
to play. Yeah. I mean, nobody in the Royals had even called me to say, thanks for your service, but we're not interested anymore.
Right.
And literally the day I was going to sign, I get a phone call from Tony Musso, our manager.
Yeah.
He said, hey, I heard you might be signing somewhere else. I said, yeah. I said, I don't have many options. I go, I've got 3 clubs. I said, unfortunately, the Royals are not one of them.
Yeah.
He goes, well, don't sign yet. He goes, I want to make a phone call and see if I can't find a way to get something done. And he calls me back and he said, look, he goes, Mr. Glass says we can't pay anybody over X amount of dollars. And that's why you didn't get a contract, because your contract last year was for more than that. And they didn't want to embarrass you by sending you a contract for less than you had made before.
Okay.
Did you buy that?
Well, I never thought a lot about it. I said, why? I said, my wife and I would still love to make Kansas City home and play baseball in Kansas City. And he said, well, we'll make you an offer and you can decide. So they made an offer. It was about half of what I made the year before, but they built in some incentives to maybe get it close to what I made the year before. And I told my wife, she goes, we're not going to Baltimore. We're staying in Kansas City. But we had 4 children, It's
Right. Oh, sure. Yeah.
And that's the thing a lot of people don't realize is that, we're athletes. We're on the field. We're doing our job. And you're watching us on TV and cheering for us.
Yeah.
But we're also, the head of the household.
Yeah.
We have family and we have our wives are taking care of our 4 children and getting them to practices and to schools and to events and such. So it's a big strain on the family.
Oh, it's huge.
When you're on the road, if I was going to be taking a 6-month road trip if I went somewhere else.
Literally, because you're not going to pack up the house and the wife and 4 kids and go to Baltimore. What's interesting, so we almost had the exact same conversation with Alex Gordon because, he retired and the guy is just in phenomenal shape, right?
Yep.
Probably could have played another year or 2 or if he wanted to.
He could still be playing.
Yeah, he could literally still be playing, but he said, I wanted to spend more time with the kids, hang out with the wife, see them grow up. So, no, totally get it because, you literally would have been in Baltimore for 3 years.
3 years. And my daughter, the 99, which was my last year, my daughter was starting high school. And I knew that was going to be a very important time for me to be there and be part of her life.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Wow. So talking about the end of the career, and I love the stories, right, Bobby?
Dude,
that's why we do this show, right?
I love it.
Cal Ripken doing a recruiting call, that's pretty awesome, man. So you retire. What was the transition? Did you kind of have a feeling that you wanted to go into the broadcasting aspect of baseball? Did you have any inkling after you retired that you were going to start going in that direction?
I really didn't. And I'll start on the day I retired. I mentioned 99 is my last season. I had a hip injury that really hampered me during the course of the year. So physically, I limped to the finish line. Essentially, I literally limped to the finish line getting to the end of the season. Really struggled with my right hip health, which eventually had my hip replaced, and it's all good now. But I was not going to be able to pitch at that level with the injury I had. So I retire. I mentioned that that year the Royals had they gave me a kind of a low base contract with incentives. One of my incentives was pitching 50 games. And I pitched in 49 games.
Of course.
Oh, my gosh.
The last game of the season here in Kansas City was a Sunday, and get to the ballpark, and it's raining like crazy. It's like 40 degrees and rainy and ugly, and it's going to rain all day long. And they canceled the game like at 10 in the morning.
Did they really?
So my last game, my last game, they called off early, right?
Oh, my gosh.
So I got there early. I knew it was going to be my last game, and I did my pregame, warm up and conditioning, all that. Probably having a good idea we weren't going to play, but I did it anyway. So I do it. They call off the game. I go in the clubhouse. I take off my uniform. I throw it into the dirty clothes, hamper. I go in the shower and I just start crying.
Oh, man.
I'm crying like a baby, and I can't stop crying. I realize that's the last time ever I'm going to put on that uniform.
Oh, wow.
And it was so hard for me. It was so hard.
Yeah.
I got that cry out of my system. I came in, put my clothes on, and I never looked back.
Kidding.
I never once said, I wish I could do it again.
Right.
I would have done it till I was 88 if,
Sure.
Father Time's still undefeated, right? But,
right.
I would have done it forever. I loved it. But I got that out of my system. I remember my wife had a little Chiefs watch party that day. Some friends came over and had a great time. Then I always had a dream of coaching my boys. My dad coached me growing up in Little League and Babe Ruth, American Legion Baseball.
Sure.
And I always wanted to do it with my boys. And I remember I played for the Billings Mustang. The first team I ever played on was in '83. I was drafted by the Reds. I go to Billings, Montana. The team is called the Billings Mustangs. And I always thought, you know what? I want to have Monty's Mustang someday.
Monty's Mustangs.
Monty's Mustangs.
Heck yeah.
So I started thinking about, I'm going to have a team with Monty's Mustangs, and our uniforms that were white with red. They looked a lot like the Billings Mustangs uniforms, right? So I started coaching, and I did that for 9 years. 5 years with my older boy and then 4 years with my younger son. So for 9 years, I coached amateur baseball. You asked me about the broadcasting thing, and here I am that winter, about this time of year, I get a phone call from the Royals' Mike Swanson.
Oh, yeah, Swanee.
And he said, hey, would you have any interest in doing some TV work for us? I'm like, Swanee, I never really thought much about that, but, I'll give it a shot. So that was, December, January, whenever it was. And I don't think anything else about it. I don't hear a word.
What was it, about 2010-ish?
Yeah, probably right? 2009, 2010. Yep. And so sometime in May, I get a phone call from Kevin Shank, who's the Royals television producer.
Okay.
Kevin Shank calls me and said, hey, he goes, I heard you might have some interest in doing some TV. I'm like, yeah, I talked to Swanee like back in the winter.
You're like, the season started already, right?
Yeah, the season already started. He goes, you have any interest still? And I go, I guess. He goes, well, can you be here today at 3:00?
Oh, my.
So I go, sure. What do I wear? He goes, coat and tie, be here at 3:00. So I go there, started my TV career.
Did they have you on the air that day?
On the air that day, yeah.
No, you're kidding.
I feel like I saw your first broadcast.
Well, it was terrible, so it would be memorable.
So I actually have a question, a bullet point that I wanted to talk about this. So it was a perfect segue.
Right.
Talk maybe about your early struggles of literally, I didn't know the story that it just was like a light switch, but talk about the struggles of going from player, father, coach of kids to all of a sudden, literally overnight, now I'm a TV personality. Because we talked with Holtzy the other day, and we've talked a lot with the Fever,
Ryan,
talking about the amount of preparation that goes in for every single broadcast, just everything. So maybe just discuss what that process and what that journey was like for you.
Well, from the day I retired to the day I started doing TV, everything is really easy. Because coaching, baseball was in my blood. It was very easy. It was great for me to have that bond and a relationship with my sons and, the teammates. That was really, that was my baseball fix. Now, I will also preface, it's unfortunate as to why I started TV. The reason I started television because Paul Splittorff was dealing with some his throat cancer.
Oh, that was the reason.
That's why I do remember that game, because I was like, this is different.
Yeah.
Right. So do you think, him with coming down with that was really the onus of like, hey, Jeff, you're up, we need you?
Right. They needed somebody when Split was having some treatments and therapy and such that he was just out of energy, and he needed, they just needed somebody like almost to be a reliever, come in out of the pen and help out, when you need it. So that's the unfortunate situation as to why I started this. So, but anyway, up to that point, everything was pretty easy. Now, broadcasting is hard. I mean, it's especially for let's call me an ex-jock. I never had any training. I didn't go to school to study broadcast journalism. There's no preparation. I mean, they're telling me things in my ear. I'm like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. That terminology means nothing to me.
Right.
And it's really hard. And I always describe it like this. So if you saw the first one, here's what it would sound like. You get in a car and they give you the keys to a NASCAR at the speedway, and they say, you go drive that car 200 miles an hour. And you're out there driving 200 miles an hour, and you're scared to death. It's like, finally get it 200 miles an hour, you get done, you give them the keys, say, oh my God, I'm just glad I made it through without crashing, right? And that's the way it is when you first start doing live TV. It's like unbelievably fast, just coming at you 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, I can't even imagine like the nerves you're feeling, or maybe you're so busy with everything coming at you, you don't have time to be nervous.
Well, I wasn't nervous. Like, I would be nervous up to it start. Then you were not nervous, but you're also not very good. You're not very polished. But then the next time you drive the car around the track 200 miles an hour, you're like, okay, that was a little bit easier than the first time. And then the next time is easier. And it's just like, that's the way broadcasting is, like a lot of careers. It's just experience is good. Now, I do remember one of our producers from St. Louis was in. This is during my first month or so. And he's like, just slow down. He goes, don't try to drive 200 miles an hour. Just slow down. Let things come to you. Yeah. So I go, how long is it going to take till I feel good and comfortable? He goes, probably about 200 to 300 reps. I'm like, wait, 200 or 300 shows? That's like 3 years. Right. He goes, yeah. And he was right. I mean, it takes a couple of years before you really feel like you've got it down to the point. Everything's coming at you and it's just at a slow speed.
You kind of find your groove,
your
cadence.
And the other thing, you talk about all the preparation that goes into it. Now, we're very fortunate to have Dave Holtzman, because Dave Holtzman takes a lot of the heavy lifting away from the broadcasters. A lot of it.
He's wicked smart.
His show just dropped today on our podcast. Yeah. So it's kind of cool that we're discussing this side of the business.
So what's really cool, Monty, so he actually gave us a sample of his game notes.
His 8 pages?
His 8 pages. And the highlights and just the unbelievable amount of stats that are on there. And he was talking about how he has his special websites that he goes to extract the information and put it together for all you guys. I mean, it's true. I mean, he is like a Rain Man when it comes to the baseball stuff.
So before we had Holtzy, all that information was generally derived from something that we would want to get ourselves. So that 8 pages would take – I know it takes Holtzy hours and hours to put that together. Mm-hmm. We would spend hours and hours getting our information. Now, of the 8 pages that we get from Holtzy, there are certain things that I use every day, okay? Because a lot of times on our pregame show, I'm previewing our pitcher, their pitcher, talking about what's going on, and also we'll talk about some other players, who's hot, who's not, things like that. Holtzy gives us all that. Now, before Holtzy, again, I know I'm going to be talking about whoever it might be, Garrett Cole from the Yankees. Mm-hmm. And I go do my own research on Garrett Cole and find out when he's drafted, where's he played, I'd have to go do all that myself. But now it's very easy. I mean, Holtzy we've been very fortunate because I share Holtzy's notes with other TV broadcasters, like a good friend of mine, former Royal, Pat Tabler, is a Blue Jays color analyst. And I'll give him first time I showed him Holtzy's notes, he goes, this is unbelievable. He goes, this is unbelievable. Right. He goes, can you give them to me for tomorrow? So every time we play the Blue Jays in the morning, I get a text message from Tabby saying, hey, I need those Holtzy notes. Yeah.
So you just send them over to him?
I just email them to him.
That's amazing.
And he goes, they make me look so smart.
That's fantastic. Holtzy, you're welcome.
That's fantastic.
A great shout out.
This is so random, but you mentioned Pat Tabler. That reminds me of, Pat Tabler was traded to the Royals in the Bud Black deal. And I remember George Brett was not so happy about that because he was super tight with Bud Black. Yeah. So
the irony of that is that Pat Tabler and I eventually lived next door to each other in Cincinnati.
Wow.
The even more interesting part is that particular day that Bud Black was traded to the Indians and Tabby comes to the Royals, Jeff Montgomery comes from that trip I was on in College World Series in Omaha. To Kansas City, and Bo Jackson goes on the disabled list. So I took Bo's spot on the roster. And so Tabby and I arrived in Kansas City on exactly the same day.
How cool is that?
What a story.
And now you guys are still buddies to this day.
Oh, we're great friends, yeah.
Wow.
That's amazing. That is fantastic
so,
stuff.
we were talking about great seasons for you, and 93 was one of them. I think the 93 season, if I'm not mistaken, you may not know this. You were 13th in the AL MVP vote.
I didn't know that.
93. Yeah. Good stuff, Bobby.
Yeah.
Nice research, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, you got a couple MVP votes.
Well, 45 saves. I mean, that at the time tied Quisenberry, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
Greg Holland eventually broke that record, and people would always come to me and say, how do you feel, if Holland breaks your record? I go, that is not my record. That is Quiz's record.
Yeah. Right.
Quiz's record.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Because, essentially you were coming from a line of really good relievers. You had Quiz, and then we had Farr for a little bit, and then you stepped right in and took that role for a very long time. So that's really cool. That's really cool. Hey, I had another. So I just have these random questions just pop in my head. So I wanted to go back real quick on that 49. You had 49 games in your last season, right? You had one more to hit the 50. So as a player, is that when you, like, before the game, you hit up your manager and say, hey, bro, yeah, I've got one more game in my contract for this? I mean, does that stuff happen?
It may have. It didn't happen with me. I knew I wasn't going to pitch that day.
Okay.
I knew he'd pitched me on Saturday night, and I think maybe because he knew it was going to rain on Sunday.
Okay.
But I'm sure the Royals told him there's no way you let him get to 50.
Jeez. Insider trading. There.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
It was just, I'd sat for like, I probably pitched once or twice in the last, 10 days of the season. It was pretty obvious to me that things were slowing down hard.
Yeah, they're slowing down. I was just curious, like, if, with players and incentives in their contracts, if it's the last week or two, if they air that out, to the clubhouse and be like, hey, if I get X amount of bats, I get this amount of money.
Well, if I would have felt like I had earned that right, I probably would have made more of an effort, but I struggled so much that year.
Gotcha.
I pitched for 17 seasons and I had one terrible year, and that was it. I was, right. A lot of people were saying you should retire. It's embarrassing, to go out and, pitch the way you are, which it was tough, but sure. I also wasn't going to quit.
Right.
Somebody that we had on the show, I'm having it was Leo. He told some stories on when he was going through his injuries. Mm-hmm. He went through some crazy injuries and then came back. And he told a story about how a lot of the Kansas City sports writers had written some stories like, get out of here. Like, we're over you, Leo. Like, it's time for you to hang it up. And that actually bothered him, right? Mm-hmm. But it bothered him, but it also motivated him. Yeah. So as you're talking about your final year of struggles and your final year of your career, were things like that happening? Were you bothered by it? Maybe just talk a little bit about the human side of a professional athlete.
Yeah, it was really tough because you go out and you work hard for yourself, your family, your team in your city, mm-hmm. and you do everything you can, and then when things are going great, everybody loves you.
Right.
And then when things turn, it's really tough. Now, we had a columnist here named Jason Whitlock at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And Jason, he was a big proponent of me retiring. He wrote columns about, it's embarrassing for me to go out there. In fact, I'll never forget there was a sign. There was a picture of it, I think, in the Star, but somebody's holding up a relief, holding up a sign out that says, how do we spell relief? And it spelled out retirement. Instead of Rolaids. How do we spell relief?
Yeah.
Retirement. And it was, they were making a point to me that I should retire. And honestly, I just had so much desire to finish a season. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to me, it would have been quitting.
Sure.
Whether you're going good, you're going bad, you make a commitment to a team, they make a commitment to you, you stick with it.
Absolutely.
Well, it says a lot about your character, right? And other guys that go through something like that and just want to grind and do whatever it takes to get to the finish line.
Exactly. So, Monty, let's talk about some stories that obviously you can share. We don't want anything that you can't reveal. We can do that off air. But what are some of is there one or two stories that really stick out in your career? Whether it's your minor league days, your major league, even broadcasting.
Wow, so many. I'm trying to think of some
teammates.
We have 3 hours left, so take your
stories that come to mind here. A lot of times people ask me about George, and George was just an incredible teammate. It didn't matter if you had a day in the major leagues or 10 years in the major leagues. George made you feel very comfortable, like you deserved to be there, like you belonged on that team. And I'll never forget the first time we go to Fenway Park. It would have been in 88, probably June of 88. And remember we had a night game Friday, day game Saturday, day game Sunday. So Friday night, game's over. I'm walking in the concourse of Fenway Park to go to the bus. And George's like, hey, rookie, where are you going? I go, I'm just going to take the bus back to the hotel. And he goes, no, you're not. You're coming with us tonight.
Oh, boy, here we go.
So we go out, and it was one of those all-nighters. Literally, I don't.
You got a day game the next day?
Yeah, but I didn't know it at the time, but George had been told he had Saturday off.
Oh. Yes.
So George got Saturday off, right? So I don't know if we saw the sun come up, but it was pretty close to the time the sun's coming up in the morning.
Oh, wow.
I'm only 26 at the time. I could handle it. There's no big deal.
Yeah.
And I'm a relief pitcher. I only got to throw an inning, so I could handle it. But I'll never forget. We get on the bus on the next morning, and George just, you can tell from looking at his eyes that he's hung
green around the gills.
Right.
We all felt probably the same, but George probably at the time was 35 is my guess. I don't remember for sure how old he was, but he had a lot of experience at the time. Mm-hmm. But he's got a day off, right?
Yeah.
So we get to the ballpark, and George never rode a bus. George always would go early and work out, but that day he's riding a bus. So
skipped his workout.
Right.
as soon as we get there, our manager John Wathen, so Duke calls George in the office. He goes, "You're in the lineup."
Oh shit!
No.
He said, "Willie's sick. You're in the lineup."
That's phenomenal.
George goes out and hits 3 balls off the Green Monster.
Get out!
Oh, you're kidding.
3 doubles.
No kidding.
And that's just the way George rolled.
George.
Oh my gosh.
That's incredible.
Probably was just dragging himself, and he's just like, oh, whatever.
Just slap it.
Yeah, just
opposite
go.
field.
You know what's funny about that is, just a few years ago, Dayton Moore had a charity wiffle ball tournament. Mm-hmm. And I'm pitching, and George goes to the plate. He's got 3 bats.
Like his silver slug.
He's got 3 like wiffle ball bats, right?
Yeah.
So I get in the ball bucket, and I grab 2 more balls. So now I got 3 balls in my hand, and I throw 3 balls at George, right? And he hits one of them out of the park.
Oh my gosh. So of course he does.
So we're doing a little radio interview afterwards, and whoever's interviewing said, "How about George hitting the home run?" And I said, "Well, I didn't really know if he had a chance, but he had 3 bats. I'm going to throw him 3 balls." He goes, "Well, George already told us that there were a lot of times that he saw 3 baseballs that he'd always hit the middle one."
Got the googly eyes.
That's amazing.
Those are good. How about, along the line of stories, if past teammates were going to talk about Monty and tell some stories about Monty or talk about some quirks, what would some past teammates tell us about you?
Someone would say I was very superstitious. I don't think that I was real superstitious.
Like Kevin Apier level?
No, but like I would always try to run at around 4 o'clock every day.
Okay.
And they would always say, "Oh, it's 4:03. Here he goes." It's like that. But that I didn't do it because I was superstitious. I had to run at 4:03 or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. It was because that's what worked for me. Mm-hmm. And I just had a program that I worked off of. And there were a few times when circumstances would mean that I couldn't do that. Maybe there's like a old timers game on the field or something's going on where I couldn't do my routine. So I'd do it sometimes after the game. I got a good story about it after the game here in a minute, but so the times I didn't do my routine on a pitch, it just didn't seem like I had quite the same sharpness.
Sound familiar, DC?
So
routines?
I'd always find a way to do it, do my routine. I knew what worked for me, and that's really kind of what happened. And that reminds me, one of the days I couldn't get my routine in for one reason or another. I come in and I pitch, and I didn't do real well. I remember we were losing by quite a few runs, and we're playing at the time the Indians. So I'm going to get my workout in. I think I came in and pitched the 8th inning, maybe just to get some work. So I pitch the inning, come in, take off my uniform. I get on the treadmill right off the clubhouse there in the exercise room. So I'm on the treadmill, I'm running. I'm running for 20, 25 minutes. And I'm watching the game on the TV, and we have a big rally.
Oh, shit.
We're scoring runs. We scored like 10 or 11 runs. It's one of the biggest comebacks ever.
Nice.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm the pitcher. I'm in the game. Now, so I run out into the clubhouse to get my uniform, and the clubby's there. Tommy Walsh is there. I go, "T-Man, where's my uniform?" He goes, it's in the washing machine.
Oh my gosh. And you're still in the game.
I'm still in the game. Oh. And I didn't even realize it. I thought it was over. I thought I'm not going back out there.
Yeah.
So he runs and gets my spare uniform, my second uniform. I suit up real quick. Inning's over now. I'm running down the tunnel to get to the dugout. And Bruce Keeston, our pitching coach, he goes, "Hey, that's all right." He goes, "Somebody's got the 9th." So,
oh my gosh. But did you have your jersey on, or did you have someone else's?
No, I had my jersey on. He got my spare uniform out of the trunk or whatever.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Would any past teammates say anything about? Did you have any quirks besides your daily routine?
No, I mean Mark Gubazade always say I'd pop out of a manhole. They'd be somewhere, and I'd always pop up out of the manhole. Wherever they would be, I would always find a way to find them.
That's hilarious.
Man, it would be cool to get Gooby on the show. Tell that story about the plane with George.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Wonder if Gooby gets all those stats. You know, obviously he does some announcing for the Angels, right? Wonder if he gets all that fun stuff.
Did you touch base with him at all? Like when you were first getting in, like, hey, some tips, some pointers?
Yeah, I would reach out to, I have a lot of contemporaries who are doing what I do now. And everybody pretty much the same thing. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from Paul Splittorff. Split said, look, he goes, I don't care how good of a player you were, how good a player you weren't. Doesn't matter. You're an announcer now. You're a broadcaster. He goes, when you show up to work every day, you be ready to work. You be ready to do your job, prepare for it. He goes, the biggest thing I see from guys who don't make it, they just show up thinking they're just going to
just wing it
and make it happen. And the other thing he said was, there are a lot of people in this game that get paid a lot of money, to do a job. And if they don't do a job, it's okay to go home and not sleep at night. He goes, you're not one of those people. He goes, you're not one of those people. He goes, you have a bad game as an announcer. Don't go to the hotel and beat yourself up.
Sure.
Just, he goes, you're going to remember it. Almost everybody's going to forget it.
It's true.
People aren't going to remember. He goes, you're not one of those people that are paid to go home and lose sleep over having a bad day.
Man, what's some great feedback, from a mentor like that. That's really cool.
That's really, really good.
So speaking of, announcing, is there like a particular favorite city, whether you're a player or as announcers? Do you have like one or two cities that you really enjoy going to during the baseball season?
Yeah, they're all really good. There are some ballparks that are more difficult than others. As far as like the broadcast booth and such. But there are a lot of great ballparks. And, there's a lot of discussion now with regards to, Kauffman Stadium, building a new ballpark downtown.
Right.
And I think anybody who would go to one of the new ballparks versus what we've had for 50 years here at Kauffman, and believe me, I've had so many memories and I love Kauffman Stadium. But if you go to a new ballpark, you'd say, gosh, wow, we could use a new ballpark.
Oh, absolutely. So my wife and I, we had the privilege of last summer we had a wedding and we had to go through Georgia. So we had a layover in Atlanta. I'm like, let's just stay a night. Let's, we're trying to hit all the ballparks, right? And we've got 19 or 20 of them done now. So we went to, I think it's Truist Park in Atlanta, saw Kevin Seitzer, the hitting coach. But anyway, just the ballpark, the amenities, the restaurants, there was such a vibe around that whole stadium that you really just can't replicate. And we love Kauffman, right? It's fantastic, but I can totally understand what they're trying to do to bring it's really kind of a family feel. But man, it's just a whole vibe that you can't really replicate with what we have right now.
Right, and I think having all the discussion with regards to location and parking and all the naysayers that have. All these other cities have found a way to figure it out.
Sure.
And I think there are smart enough people here that can do the same.
Absolutely.
But, I'm sure it's going to be a lot of hoops and hurdles to get through, but eventually I'm hopeful that we have a chance to experience that.
Exactly.
I think we will, yeah.
So speaking of new stuff, any of the upcoming players, some of the new guys that, I know we've got Bobby Witt Jr. Is there we've got a lot of young guys that are up and coming. They look really good. Is there anyone that you're really particularly excited about?
I'll focus on a couple young pitchers that, to me, I saw a lot of potential from. Obviously, it's easy to look at Brady Singer and what he's done. We know the potential with regards to all those other 2018 draft guys, and really even if you throw Jonathan Heasley and there's 5 guys from an 18 draft. So all those guys that are in the 18 draft, they all have a chance to become Brady Singer at some point. Not all of them will. That's just the way baseball is.
Sure.
Somebody will get hurt. Somebody just won't make it. But I like the stuff that they all have. And I think that a chance for a couple more of those guys to emerge and be very solid, major league pitchers, I think that exists. I think that's there. If you remember last year, we went to Toronto. That was what we call the COVID trip, when all the players that didn't have the vaccination couldn't go.
Right.
We called up a kid named Angel Zerpa, a left-handed pitcher. And this guy really, to me, shows signs of being a solid guy. I mean, he's not an overpowering, not a dominant guy, but he's really he's got that high level of confidence in himself. He works quick. He's a guy that I think's got a chance to be pretty good. It's one of those under the radar type guys that we'll see. And then I really like the way some of those younger bullpen arms kind of started turning the corner last year and started kind of believing themselves and going out there and
It's like confidence, like we're talking about.
And that's so important, regardless of your position, but especially if you're a pitcher. I talked to you earlier about Bob Boone, telling me, hey, don't throw the inside corner, don't throw the outside corner. I always said the bottom corner. That's a pretty big corner, and once you have that confidence that your stuff plays, then it's easy to go out and do your job.
Right.
And I just think a lot of those, like Dylan Coleman, for example, young arm last year, hit the ground running, had a few struggles, went to the minor leagues, came back, established confidence in himself, and became a really quality guy that you're going to put in high leverage situations, going to do a good job for you. So I think we've got the makings for a nice core of young players. I know Jordan Lyles was signed. I'm hopeful we're going to sign Zach Greinke back.
That'd be nice.
So you're going to have a little mix there in the rotation because let's face it, you're going to need probably at least 10 starting pitchers during the course of a season to get through because guys going to need a little bit of a rest here and there. Especially if you bring a Zach Greinke back, that maybe after 10 or 12 starts, give him a time to shut down, recharge the batteries, and he's come back strong again. So I think there's some promising signs when we look at the position players. One guy that had a chance to play last year, Michael Massey at second base. I think once he gets to the stage where he's a more consistent contact hitter, be a solid guy. And then I think we hit on three of those young players already. I think Pasquantino, Melendez, and Witt. I think they've all proven they're going to be long-term, consistent performers and big contributors to the offense. So, and then some of the other not necessarily established guys. I just think there's enough in the mix that it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think having a new manager. I think it's kind of a fresh set of eyes, maybe a new way of doing things.
Sure.
Maybe you kind of get that at next level with those. Now, I love Mike Matheny. I thought he was a really good fit for these young players, but I wasn't in the clubhouse every day and have no idea what his style was in the clubhouse. But I think Matt Quatrero is a guy who he's been around winning managers like Terry Francona and Kevin Cash down in Tampa. He understands what it takes, and he's also going to be a very, very thoughtful decision maker.
Yeah.
Right.
High hopes for sure for the entire fan base.
And we've heard nothing but good things. And how is that? You went through that. I mean, does that a fresh voice or just a different sense of whether it's the outcomes or philosophies, or does that help mix things up a little bit with having a new manager come in?
So I had 5 major league managers. All 5 were in their very first managerial job in the big leagues. So I didn't have any experienced managers.
Wow.
The manager who to me really developed into the best manager was Hal McRae. And so much of that to me goes into the fact that Hal was a player who was he was a leader. And I don't care if you're managing the Kansas City Royals or if you're managing a retail store down the street, your job is to get the most out of your employees. And I think Hal had that personality, had that leadership quality and ability to get the most out of his guys.
Right.
Even as a player.
Right.
I mean, everybody wanted to play for him.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of those guys from that era told those stories.
Yeah, he would kick you in the rear if you didn't do your job right.
Yeah. What was the story? Was Willie Wilson telling us, or I forget who? But they would wheel, Hal McRae would get in a cart and they would wheel him through the clubhouse, and he would just talk trash to people.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh he would be underneath all the laundry, and then he'd have somebody wheel him up to someone who was struggling
or hurt or something like that.
Yeah, and then he'd pop out and totally call him out and say, "You don't deserve to be on this team hitting 200."
Right.
So, as we're getting close here towards the end, Monty, you talk about your intro into TV and broadcasting, but really that's not accurate. I mean, you were a TV / kind of movie star with the Fundamentals of Pitching
Here we go.
VHS that came out.
Have you had a chance to see it?
You know, had I prepared better,
Right.
I would have got a copy off of eBay for $20 and had this here for you to sign.
That would have been amazing.
Wow, I should have brought one for you.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
You guys go buy a VHS machine. But
Right.
We'll have to go to the antique store and find one.
But, yeah, it'd be good for a little tune-up before fantasy camp.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
That would be fantastic.
Cool. Well, is there anything else, Monty, that you want to share, kind of what you're working on right now, or anything else that you want to share with the audience?
The biggest thing we're working on right now is my golf game.
Yeah.
How's that going? Because I know you're heading to Florida here soon.
I'm going to Florida. I started playing it's called Interclub. So you're basically on a golf team. A couple of years ago. I couldn't do it last year. I had shoulder surgery, so I was out of action. But 2 years ago, I played on our club team in Florida, and it starts early January. Now, obviously, I've not been able to play a lot of golf outside because of the weather we've experienced here recently. But I've got a little golf simulator in my house. I've been working
practicing.
on my game a little bit, right? So I'm looking forward. But it's amazing. It's a lot like being a rookie in baseball.
Okay.
First time in the big league. First time I got on the tee box on the Interclub team, I hit a ball like so far out of bounds, it's unbelievable. But it's all I'd never played on a competitive golf team.
Right.
I was nervous. It's just like getting on the mound for the first time, you know, in the big leagues. But I love the competition. I love the desire, the urgency, the need to compete and hopefully come out on top.
Does that kind of fill that athletic void?
It does. It gives you a little adrenaline.
Exactly. So with being on the golf team, so when do you have to go to spring training? Like, do you have to go down to Surprise and do a couple games, kind of like to get warmed up, or like opening day, you guys just show up and you're ready to go?
We generally would broadcast about 10 games from spring training camp, and usually about half of those games are what we call they're produced by whoever the home team is. Like if we're the home team, we'll produce it and we'll use our announcers. Okay. If we're playing against the Brewers, they'll produce it and we'll use their announcers. So about 5 or 6 games we'll do, and generally Rex Hudler goes for half the games, I go for half the games, and they try to bunch them together. So we've only got to go out for about a week. Okay. Not that I don't like spring training, but the season is so darn long.
Oh my gosh, and the travel.
And the travel, it's like it's just the least amount of time in spring training. Even as a player, I love the first day of spring training. Yeah. But I love the last day even more.
I bet. Well, one thing that I always think about, and maybe you can share with us as we get closer if this is a struggle, but I couldn't imagine being on the road for 6 months and not just gaining 200 pounds by going out to eat and wanting to hit like all the top restaurants in the different cities. Is that ever a challenge?
Well, I know as a broadcaster it is. Yeah. Because you do. You literally find yourself eating so much more than you eat when you're at home. Mm-hmm. And like we eat in the press dining, and there always like a buffet style thing. So it's like, a little extra of this. So I always put on 8 or 10 pounds during the course of the year. It takes me 3 months to trim it down. Then it all starts over again opening day.
It's a vicious cycle.
That sounds like us training for fantasy camp.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool, Monty. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
We appreciate your time, man.
You bet. I'm glad to be here, and hope we can do it again someday.
We had to get you in before the blizzard sets in.
Yeah, that's right. No doubt. We appreciate your time. Well, guys, this has been the Always Be Cool podcast in the Summit Lending Studios with Bobby Kerr and Darren Copeland and the one, the only Mr. Jeff Montgomery. All right. Take care, guys.
Thanks.
If you are hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode. And for that, Darren and Bobby thank you from the bottom of their hearts.
They hope you enjoyed this new episode. And if you did, please leave them a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening. Please share this episode with others who may be interested in our community.
Also, feel free to let DC and BK know which business or community leaders you'd like to see covered in future episodes. Get in touch in the comments or on social media. See you next time for a new episode. And remember, always be cool.
This podcast is powered by Summit Lending, NMLS number 1850081, Equal Housing Lender.